Something unusual is unfolding in Washington, and even seasoned analysts admit they didn't expect the timing. For more than 20 years, H.R. 38 sat as an idea, a debate, a talking point, but never a real threat to the status quo. Then, almost overnight, Congress moved it forward with a level of speed that caught both supporters and critics off balance. This shift didn't come from one party or one headline. It came from pressure stacking up on all sides. Truckers are getting arrested for crossing invisible borders. Parents who carry legally at home are suddenly breaking rules 2 miles away. Federal judges openly acknowledge that the current system burdens constitutional rights, yet claim their hands are tied. Meanwhile, 24 attorneys general, the top law enforcement voices in nearly half the country, have told Congress the patchwork is beyond repair. Add the Supreme Court's stronger stance on the Second Amendment and a political climate where millions of gun owners want clarity instead of confusion, and the old framework simply can't hold. Congress didn't choose to rewrite pistol rules. They were forced into it by reality, and that's why H.R. 38 is now impossible to ignore. What happened next wasn't slow, quiet, or subtle. The moment H.R. 38 hit the Capitol floor, the entire political landscape jolted like someone pulled the fire alarm. And the shockwave didn't start with paperwork, it started with power. When former President Trump publicly backed nationwide reciprocity, every reporter, lawmaker, and legal analyst in Washington realized the conversation had instantly shifted. His support didn't just brighten the spotlight, it shoved H.R. 38 straight into the center of the national fight. Suddenly, millions of gun owners who'd been dealing with border traps and confusing reciprocity maps had one clear message coming from the top. This bill isn't a talking point, it's a priority. And right behind that message came the Judiciary Committee's 18-9 vote, a moment that reminded everyone that this wasn't symbolic. It was movement, real momentum, the kind that forces Congress to react instead of stall. Then came the letter that rattled the remaining holdouts. 24 attorneys general, the highest law enforcement officers in nearly half the country, telling Congress the current patchwork system is broken. That kind of unified pressure doesn't happen by accident. It happens when states are tired of watching innocent carriers get hit with charges because of invisible lines on a map. And that's why H.R. 38 isn't just a bill anymore. It's the center of a national showdown, one that's speeding up faster than anyone expected. We've talked about momentum. We've talked about politics, but now we're stepping into the part that actually hits your life. The rules, 10 of them, each one crafted to close a loophole, erase a trap, or force states to stop treating your rights like a patchwork gamble. These rules are the engine of H.R. 38, the reason gun owners, lawyers, sheriffs, and policymakers are all watching 2026 with more tension than ever. If you want to understand what's really coming, this is the section that separates rumors from reality. Before we break it down, remember this. Rule number 1 alone would have saved thousands of Americans from felony charges over the past decade. So, let's open the first door. Here's the rule that finally ends the game of interstate roulette. Under H.R. 38, the permit sitting in your wallet doesn't shrink when you cross a border. It grows. That single card becomes your nationwide credential, working the moment you step into any state that allows concealed carry. No more scanning maps at gas stations, no more pulling over to double-etched check reciprocity charts, no more fear that a wrong turn puts you in legal jeopardy. For years, carriers have lived with 50 interpretations of the same right. This rule crushes that chaos and replaces it with one clear standard. If your home state trusts you to carry, the rest of the country must respect it. One permit finally treated like one right. If you live in a constitutional carry state, this is where H.R. 38 feels like someone finally fixed the glitch. Right now, your freedom ends the moment your tires cross a line drawn on a map. Under this rule, that freedom doesn't pause, dim, or disappear. It stays with you. Wherever you travel, your home state status remains intact, and you're not treated like a stranger to your own rights. This wipes out the anxiety of wondering whether a different state respects the practice your own state fully embraces. It acknowledges a simple truth. If your state trusts you enough to carry without paperwork, other states shouldn't treat you like you suddenly forgot how to be responsible. This rule turns consistency into protection. Anyone who's driven across state lines knows the tension behind this rule. One officer who doesn't recognize your permit can turn a simple traffic stop into an unpredictable situation. H.R. 38 rips that uncertainty out of the equation entirely. If your permit is valid at home, officers in every state must treat it as legitimate. No lecturing, no confusion, no claiming your permit isn't accepted here. This rule forces a uniform standard that officers must follow, not interpret. For travelers, truckers, and daily carriers, it removes the dread of a roadside argument and replaces it with clarity. It turns traffic stops back into traffic stops, not improvised legal tests that you can fail just because of a zip code. This is the rule that finally gives lawful carriers a defensive wall instead of a lightning rod. Under the old system, if another state questioned your permit, the burden fell on you instantly. Explain your paperwork, your training, your residency, your intent. H.R. 38 flips that dynamic with force. Now, if a prosecutor wants to challenge you, they must prove you weren't qualified to carry, not suggest, not speculate. Prove it. This shift shuts down the lazy assumptions and bad faith prosecutions that have drained carriers for years. It signals to every jurisdiction that if they want to bring a case, they'd better have more than suspicion because the era of making the gun owner defend everything is over. Here's the rule that changes behavior faster than any speech or memo. In the past, even if you were arrested incorrectly while carrying legally, the financial nightmare fell entirely on you. The lawyers, the court appearances, the damage control. H.R. 38 rewires that pressure point completely. If law enforcement gets it wrong and arrests a lawful carrier, the agency has to pay for the fallout, every court cost, every legal bill, every dollar spent proving the arrest never should have happened. This rule hits departments where they feel it, their budgets, and sends a message that careless enforcement has real consequences. When wrongful arrests start costing agencies money, the culture shifts, and lawful carriers finally get the respect they deserved all along. For decades, gun owners have carried a risk they never agreed to. The idea that you could leave your driveway completely legal, cross into the next state, and instantly become a felon without changing a single thing about how you carry H.R. 38 crushes that trap. Under this rule, your legal status doesn't reset when the pavement changes color or the welcome sign flashes past your windshield. If your home state authorizes you to carry, that status stays with you as you travel, and states can no longer weaponize invisible borders against responsible people who are simply trying to get from point A to point B. This rule wipes away the fear that turned family trips, delivery routes, and trucking lanes into minefields, and finally restores something basic: the ability to travel without wondering whether the next exit might change your entire future. Now, here's where H.R. 38 shows it wasn't written in a vacuum. Even with nationwide permit recognition, Congress didn't bulldo the rights of property owners. This rule draws a clean line. Private businesses, homes, and establishments still decide their own carry policies, and H.R. 38 doesn't override them. What it does stop is the sneaky tactic some states used, twisting private property rules into citywide bans where carriers were expected to magically know a rule that was never posted. H.R. 38 ends that confusion by returning authority to the person who actually owns the property, while stopping states from turning private property into a loophole for backdoor gun bans. It gives clarity to carriers, respect to owners, and balance that's been missing for years. This is the rule that prevents some very expensive mistakes. Even with H.R. 38 reshaping how states recognize permits, federal gun-free zones remain untouched, meaning post offices, federal buildings, cuirasses, and protected zones stay exactly as they are right now. H.R. 38 doesn't override federal authority, and understanding that boundary is part of carrying smart. What this rule really does is clean up the chaos at the state level, so you're not guessing which cities recognize your permit, while reminding you that federal laws remain a separate layer entirely. Think of this rule as the guardrail on the far edge of reciprocity. It keeps the system stable while ensuring carriers don't walk into federal trouble, assuming nationwide recognition applies everywhere. This rule is the backbone of the entire bill because it destroys the idea that a permit magically loses legitimacy the moment you step out of your home state. H.R. 38 forces states to treat your home state qualification as valid one, period. They don't have to copy your training system or adopt your background process, but they can no longer pretend it doesn't exist. For decades, this inconsistency created a nightmare where gun owners had to memorize which states respected their permit and which ones acted like it didn't exist. H.R. 38 finally ends that patchwork. Your state determines your eligibility, and every other state must honor that decision. It turns your permit into a true nationwide credential, not a permission slip with a shrinking radius. The final rule pulls strength from a place lawmakers rarely look anymore: actual American history. H.R. 38 revives the original understanding written into the 1887 New Mexico territorial law, which openly protected the right of travelers to carry firearms for self-defense while moving from place to place. That wasn't a loophole or a modern reinterpretation. It reflected how armed travel was viewed in a country where people routinely crossed long distances with no guarantee of safety. Rule number 10 forces states to recognize that historical foundation and protects modern travelers from being stripped of their rights simply for being on the move. It reconnects gun law to its roots, reinforcing that self-defense is not tied to geography. It follows the person. And once this rule goes active, states can no longer treat travel as a moment where rights evaporate. If these rules sound dramatic, it's only because the real stories behind them are even worse. Nothing exposes the broken system better than what happened to people who thought they were following the law right up until the law turned on them. Take Shania Allen, a working mom from Pennsylvania. She passed the checks, held a valid permit, and carried responsibly. But the moment she crossed into New Jersey for a birthday party, everything changed. One honest sentence during a traffic stop pushed her into felony charges that threatened her job, her freedom, and her entire future. Her crime wasn't violence, recklessness, or misconduct. It was crossing a border. Then you have the long-haul truckers, men like David McCoy and Jeffrey Johnson, who spend nearly every day on the road, often through dangerous regions. Their permits were valid at home, but worthless the moment their route passed into Minnesota. A rule book written decades ago left them unprotected, vulnerable, and legally exposed for simply doing their jobs. These aren't technical glitches, they're traps, ones ordinary Americans fall into every year, and this is exactly why the new pistol rules exist, to stop turning law-abiding carriers into accidental criminals. Whenever national reciprocity comes up, the same talking points get recycled as if no one has checked them in years. The loudest one is the states' rights argument. Critics insist each state should control who carries within its borders. But the problem is simple. No one makes this claim about driver's licenses, marriages, vehicle registrations, or professional credentials. Those move freely across state lines without panic. The moment the topic turns to self-defense, the rules suddenly change. Then comes the claim that some permits are too weak for stricter states. But the numbers tell a different story. Permit holders are among the most law-abiding people in the country, with conviction rates far below the general public and even lower than many professional groups. These citizens already pass background checks, follow training demands, and maintain spotless records, suggesting they pose a threat doesn't match any real-world data. And finally, critics lean on vague safety warnings. But decades of statistics show no wave of violence tied to responsible carriers. The danger isn't the people following the law. It's the confusion, the border traps, and the inconsistent rules that punish ordinary citizens while doing nothing to stop actual crime. These myths collapse the moment you compare them to reality, and H.R. 38 exposes that gap completely. If you really want to see why these new pistol rules stand on solid ground, you have to look backward far past today's political arguments and into the record that courts rely on when everything is stripped down to facts. And once you do, the objections from strict states don't just weaken, they collapse. For most of America's early history, travelers weren't restricted more than residents. They were often given extra freedom because moving from place to place carried real risk. The clearest example came in 1887 when the New Mexico territorial government wrote a law that explicitly protected a traveler's right to carry while on the road. That wasn't theory. That was written by people who lived just decades after the Constitution's creation, people far closer to the founders than any modern policymaker. And here's the part opponents can't explain away. Permit systems didn't even exist in the United States until 1911. That's more than a century after the Second Amendment was ratified. So when states claim their modern restrictions are tradition, the historical record says the opposite. Under the current legal test, history isn't a suggestion. It's the scoreboard. And history sides with nationwide carry. When H.R. 38 started gaining traction, some law enforcement groups rushed to raise alarms. But when you strip away the noise, only a few concerns actually hold weight. The International Association of Chiefs of Police argues that out-of-state permits will confuse officers during traffic stops, claiming there's no reliable way to check them quickly. But anyone who has seen a modern patrol car knows this tension isn't rooted in technology. Officers already run out of state plates, suspended licenses, warrants, and federal alerts in seconds. If a system can verify a car registered 1,200 miles away, it can verify a carry permit too. That said, there is a genuine worry on the ground. Inconsistency, different permit formats, different expiration layouts, different training expectations. It creates hesitation during high-pressure moments. H.R. 38 doesn't ignore that. It creates a unified baseline, so officers know what they're looking at instead as momentum builds behind the of guessing. The fear isn't about danger, and it's about clarity. And these rules finally give them new pistol rules. Several blue states are already gearing up for resistance, not loudly, but through quiet legal prep happening behind the scenes. Attorneys general in New York, California, New Jersey, and Massachusetts are drafting challenges aimed at slowing or blocking H.R. 38 the moment it becomes law. Their argument is simple. They don't want their strict standards forced to match states with broader carry laws. Expect lawsuits claiming state sovereignty and enforcement conflicts, along with rushed attempts to tighten local restrictions. They may stall the rollout, but they can't stop the nationwide shift already underway. Here's the truth most people aren't seeing yet. H.R. 38 isn't gaining traction by luck. The timing is what's pushing it forward. With Republicans holding strong influence in Congress and several moderate Democrats quietly signaling they won't die on this hill, the math finally lines up in a way it didn't years ago. Add to that a Supreme Court that has already shown repeatedly that it favors a strict reading of the Second Amendment, and you've got a moment where political momentum and judicial momentum are pointing in the same direction. Lawmakers know that 2025 and 2026 are the years when carrying nationwide becomes not just popular, but expected. Voters are paying closer attention. Courts are clearing obstacles faster, and the country is tired of the patchwork. If H.R. 38 is going to cross the finish line, this window is the one built for it. Now, here's where everything turns practical, because these rules aren't some far-off political theory. They're already shaping the way gun owners move, travel, and prepare as we head from December into 2026. If you've got a valid permit, these rules signal a future where crossing a border no longer feels like stepping into a legal minefield. If you live in a constitutional carry state, the path toward nationwide recognition is clearer than ever. And if you've ever worried about mismatched state laws or surprise restrictions, these new protections begin closing those gaps one by one. This is the moment to pay attention, update your understanding, and get ahead, because the rules are shifting and the advantages start now. The ripple effect of these new pistol rules isn't theoretical anymore. The people who live closest to the ground are already shifting their plans. Firearms manufacturers are increasing production on popular carry pistols, and holster companies are expanding inventory because they see a surge coming once nationwide recognition becomes real. Sheriffs in Piro 2A states are quietly updating internal guidance so deputies know how to handle out-of-state permits without hesitation. And carriers themselves, especially truckers and frequent travelers, are adjusting routes, reviewing training, and preparing for a future where their permit finally works everywhere they go. And that's where we are right now, guys. standing at the edge of a shift that gun owners have waited decades to see. This moment isn't hype, it's history. H.R. 38 is reshaping how Americans carry, travel, and defend themselves. And the momentum from now to 2026 is only getting stronger. So don't just watch this moment happen, be part of it. Hit subscribe, drop your thoughts below, and let's keep this community informed, prepared, and impossible to ignore. We're in this together, and the next chapter starts now. All politics news for you recently uploaded